They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And we are excited to welcome into the podcast today the author of The Magic and Mayhem of Trump. Gretchen Wollert is here. You can check her out on X at Gretchen Wollert. You can also look at her website, GretchenWollert.com. A really interesting story, by the way. She is a farmer. She is a Lincoln historian. This woman, I love to call it, they always say Renaissance men. She's a Renaissance woman in all the right ways. Gretchen, thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So take us through your story. How did you get here? How did you go from farmer to historian and back again?
Well, I don't know. It's kind of a long story, but I'll cut it a little bit short. Grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, in the suburbs. Went to college in East Tennessee. Decided to head west. Have always loved history. Did some things out west, went to college again. I have a history degree, an English degree. I have taught school for years until I decided that I didn't want to work for someone else. Raised 4 daughters. My husband and I live in Wyoming with a recent empty nest. Our 4 daughters are also in the state of Wyoming. Raising their families now. And after they left home, I decided it kind of coincided with 2016 and Donald Trump and the incredible history that we have been living through for the past 10 years. Of course, Donald Trump has created history. Even I remember as a teenager, even hearing about him. Of course, Donald Trump was always in the news. No matter where you were in the U.S., you knew about Donald Trump. But there were a few things that when he came onto the political stage, I noticed, especially after he won the 2016 election, he came with a first lady who was absolutely lambasted for anything she wore or anything she did. That was Mary Lincoln. Donald Trump also came with a 10-year-old son in the White House. And I thought, they were both very tall and they won with less than half of the popular vote. And I thought, is this even possible that Donald Trump is anything like Abraham Lincoln? And I absolutely took a deep dive for 3 years into both of their families, their upbringing, their presidencies, and all of that. And I came up with 10 chapters of similarities between Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump. That was my first book called Born to Fight, Lincoln and Trump. And this second one is an outcropping of that, where I focused on Donald Trump because there are 2 extremes with Donald Trump. Either you love him or you hate him. Either someone wants him incarcerated forever for high crimes against society, or you believe he's the savior of the nation. And there actually is a happy middle in there. There's magic, there's mayhem, but there is also the real person. And that is this book. If there's anything that you would like to know about Donald Trump that you don't know, or that you think you might know wrongly, go to this book. I talk about everything from his ancestry and where he grew up to how he communicates with people. Why does he fight the way he does? All of that is in this book, including chapter 10, which really focuses on the divided nation we're in right now. It's incredible, but we have been here before, not exactly in this same way, but we have been as divided. And that was, of course, during the time of Abraham Lincoln and when he governed. In fact, there are so many similarities that weren't in my first book because Donald Trump hadn't been shot at that point. But Abraham Lincoln was shot at twice before his second election. And that's kind of an interesting side thing there. But so much history here and so much about Donald Trump that is good, bad, ugly, but also absolutely necessary for the times we are in. Donald Trump is the person who, the leader, the president, who is so connected to what the nation needs right now, which is freedom, and not the kind of freedom that just says do whatever you want, but the freedom that is, getting back into the Constitution applies to all of us. And that's basically what we want. We want the America that our founders really intended, and that is being lost in what the Democrats and what the radical left want to do with our nation. It's an entirely different thing. So we are here split, two different nations, two different directions, and we are fighting right now. And Donald Trump actually is the one who has taught so many of us that, yes, we do have a voice. Yes, we can fight. And that's what it's all about, is simply standing up and having our say, but also saying, no, we're not going to tolerate all of this garbage talk that has been put against us and against Donald Trump. So, that's it in a nutshell.
I love that. I love the point that you're making. I think it's so interesting, actually, because I feel like I've heard more and more people draw that parallel between Trump and Lincoln, but I also just couldn't agree more that he is the only man that could do what needs to be done at this time in our country. And I think part of the issue is the left has gotten such a lock on power. And whether it's the media, whether it's academia, whether it's the government, it could only be a really relentless fighter who could battle that. And that's who he is. So I think it's so important. But I would love to hear a little bit more, because I think it's such an interesting comparison. I'd love to know what really struck you when you were doing the research. Okay, aside from the, some of the details, the circumstantial details of their lives, but in terms of either character or the battle they were up against, what were some of the light bulbs that went off for you that helped you to see how similar Trump and Lincoln are?
Well, absolutely. There are so many incredible similarities, but the light bulbs, there are those fun facts in which, little things that, wow, that's interesting that they had those similarities. Where they came from, here's something interesting. Trump doesn't really like to talk about this, but Abraham Lincoln kind of imagined a different beginning. He actually thought that he might have been an illegitimate child, and he had thoughts about this because he knew his father. His father was a farmer, and he realized that I didn't get my intellect from my father. One thing about Abraham Lincoln, he actually was very, very kind of arrogant in a way. We don't see that in him because humility worked for him during that time. But he actually thought a lot of himself. But he thought, okay, where did I get this if I didn't get it from my father? Because the last thing Abraham Lincoln wanted to do was to be a farmer. So he left what his father's occupation was. And of course, he became a lawyer. But he said, well, I know I got a lot of it from my mother. His mother died when he was 9. So he didn't know her really well, but that's where he believed he got his intellect and everything great that he felt was a good character about him. And of course, Donald Trump was also, he called it, he is a member of the Lucky Gene Club. And so those two things are very similar, but so many things about Abraham Lincoln in which his focus was on exactly one thing, and he was the man for the time for during the Civil War. His focus was bringing the nation back together, and in order to do that, he had to destroy the Confederate armies, and that was his goal. We think of Abraham Lincoln as a unifier, but his one purpose and everything that he did was toward that goal. And he had a lot of difficulty. He chose a lot of the wrong generals, a lot of the wrong people. And boy, we know Donald Trump had some issues with personnel early on. It took 3 years of civil war before Abraham Lincoln finally found a general who would actually fight to do what Lincoln knew had to be done. That focus of his was incredible. And Donald Trump is absolutely focused. There are so many things during his first administration we realized that, well, how can he get so much done? He can. Donald Trump has dealt with turmoil throughout his life, and yet he has an incredible focus that can see what needs to be done. And something also amazing between Lincoln and Trump is how they're able to bring along such an incredible huge following to see that vision, make America great again. That's basically what Lincoln was doing, bringing, of course, it was split. The Southern Democrats had seceded and wanted to do their own thing. Without Lincoln standing up, we would have had a Southern Confederacy. The new Republican Party, the president before him would have simply, what can we do? And would have just given it away. But Abraham Lincoln stood up and said, no, we're not going to let them have their own nation. And it was horrible because they had to go to war. And that was absolutely devastating to the entire nation. But Abraham Lincoln knew that's what had to happen. Donald Trump absolutely knows that he is the one who is standing up in the face of the Democrats and the radical left. And he is, I think, the only one who has had the power, the desire, the ability to not be owned by anyone because he's not in it to make money. He's only in it to do one thing. And despite what you hear from the radical left, he is in it because he cares about America. He does not want it to go the way of the socialist, globalist. And he stood up and said, no, you're not going to do that. And we all have joined in and come along. And he has taught so many political figures today how to fight and how to stand up. He was pretty much the first example. How many of you think about those Obama years where we thought, can we even say that anymore? And we really got to thinking that, well, the nation is just going down. Political correctness was just killing us. And we just weren't sure what to do about it. Me and a lot of people I knew were, well, we can't say that anymore because of the direction the nation was going. And then, boom, Donald Trump shows up and decides you can say anything you want. A lot of things we wish he wouldn't, but he does. That's a part of his mayhem. But along with that, we have the most incredible fighter that this nation has had since Abraham Lincoln.
I always say that he was born without a shame bone. Most people, he's taken so much. I feel like whatever most normal people would have to hide away in bed for a week, but he can just take it and keep going. Gretchen Wollert, talk to us about President Trump and your research into him. Obviously, we know that he's a fighter, and yes, he'll just say whatever's on his mind. But as you were doing the research, what was the most surprising thing you learned about him?
What happens when the power's out, your phone says no service, and the grid is down? Do you have a backup plan? If you don't have a satellite phone from sat123.com, you're risking more than just missed calls. A satellite phone from sat123.com keeps you connected no matter what. You could be miles from civilization or in the middle of a natural disaster. This phone works when everything else fails. It's your lifeline when the world goes dark. And let's be real, these days anything can happen. But with sat123.com, you're prepared. Sat123 is committed to American values. They believe in reliability and quality that you can trust when it matters most. Don't wait until it's too late. Head over to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off. Protect yourself, protect your family, and stay connected with sat123.com.
Well, the most surprising thing, aside from that little thing that I said, he really thinks he may be an illegitimate child. But actually, Donald Trump had some similar kind of, his father did not want to claim that he was from Germany initially, claimed that he was from Sweden. So there's that little, we're not sure about our background, but this is what we kind of wish it was. But I think there was some kind of prejudice against Germans. And so initially, Donald Trump's father said, well, our ancestry is Swedish instead of German, but that wasn't correct. But some of the most interesting stuff was, I think we all see a facade of Abraham Lincoln. We believe that he is this statesman who was very serious, and that is so far from the truth. Yes, he was absolutely the leader for the time, and he could be that statesman who was very serious. But Abraham Lincoln actually was a showman. He enjoyed being the center of attention whenever he was speaking, whenever he was debating, when he got into politics, whenever he was in a courtroom and he was the lawyer arguing the case, and whenever he was telling jokes or telling stories. And a lot of them were very off color, what you call, raunchy jokes. And Abraham Lincoln didn't care what it was about. You could call it even scatological, outhouse humor. He used a lot of that. He didn't care what it was about. What he cared about was the punchline. Was it funny? And that was something that I realized about Abraham Lincoln. And, whenever he was assassinated, this is important because I don't think we know everything about Abraham Lincoln, because his son Robert, after Lincoln was assassinated, he destroyed a lot of personal papers and a lot of things that he didn't want the world to know about his father. And I think they were some of those more human aspects of him. You can dig deep and find out from letters and different things, a lot of stuff. But I think there are some things we still don't know about Abraham Lincoln because his son destroyed a lot of things before someone finally said, stop, don't keep burning all of this important information. A trying time in the nation. But yeah, Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln, the way they are able to connect with common people. Donald Trump, we know he is not a master public speaker, but he is a master at speaking to the public. And that's an entirely different thing. The way he deals in honesty is very similar to the way Abraham Lincoln dealt in honesty. It is where what you say, what you feel, what you think, and what you do are all one person. It's not three different people. And that's what Donald Trump is. He is used to just speaking what he thinks. He's speaking what is true. Despite the left saying that, he lies all the time. Well, he does exaggerate, and we know that, but we get it. It's a New York thing. But simply being that one single entity instead of three different things whenever you speak or think or do something, you're all the same person. Believe it or not, Donald Trump is actually a self-made man. You would kind of need to get into that chapter in my book to realize it. But the same way Abraham Lincoln did not want to be a farmer, he went completely opposite that. He and his father were very different personalities. They were similar in some ways, and Abraham Lincoln did appreciate how strong farming made him, the discipline that farming gave him, but he did not want to be a farmer. That was the last thing. Donald Trump, despite his father being rich and able to help Donald in certain ways. His father was in the boroughs of Queens, building his apartment buildings, and Donald Trump went to the crazy world of real estate in Manhattan. And that was almost opposite of what his father did. So in that sense, he really is a self-made man. Something else that's similar, speaking to ladies, is Abraham Lincoln was not really able to relate certain things one-on-one with the women in his life. Abraham Lincoln actually had 2 failed love affairs before he found his first lady. And that kind of coincides with Donald Trump had 2 failed marriages before he found his first lady. But one thing about Donald Trump, and I don't know if he would even fess up to this, but it is in one of his books where he and Ivana had a terrible divorce and breakup. Of course, it was because Donald Trump had the affair with Tiffany's mom and ended up getting a divorce from Ivana and marrying
Marla Maples.
Marla Maples, sorry.
Yeah.
had a 7-year marriage with her. But he said that he just was not able to talk to Ivana one-on-one about what they both knew was happening in their relationship. And so, Abraham Lincoln was perfectly willing to let Mary Lincoln do the raising of the children, and Donald Trump as well is likes to leave the raising of the kids to their moms. So that's kind of a family-related thing. Their faith is very similar. Abraham Lincoln was not a churchgoer. He did not like the trappings of organized religion, and yet he had a very deep faith in believing that the providence of God had an important role in not only his life, but also during the war and his presidency. And Donald Trump he was, kind of a playboy for a lot of years. And yet at some point, around 2009, 2000, before that, he became a seeker of, there's more out there than just the pleasure and the life that he was doing, making deals. And so he does have a faith that is real, but not a churchgoer.
That's super interesting, because a lot of people have talked about what they perceive to be sort of a deeper faith. Certainly he's more vocal about his faith since the assassination attempt in Butler. But you're saying that you saw evidence of a shift toward a growing faith as early as 2009, 2010?
Oh, yes. He would, with Pastor White, years ago, he had contacted her after watching television.
Paula White.
Paula White, yes.
Yeah.
After watching television, and it just kind of became real to him that there is more to life than just what he was. And as an incredibly intelligent and, down-to-earth person that he is, faith is real. And understanding that God is real. And he knew that. One thing that he doesn't do is he doesn't quite understand the trappings of the evangelical community. What did he just say the other day? He doesn't have the language down, and he doesn't try. He knows that he is absolutely genuine when he says, Lord, forgive them. I think it was about the garbage comment about Joe
He
Biden.
know not
and he
what
said,
he saith.
he not knoweth what he
That's
saith.
what it was.
And it's like, oh, that's absolutely Donald Trump. It's he knoweth not what he does. But Trump doesn't make any pretenses in knowing that, but he does have a faith in God, and we see it. We see it every bit as much as Abraham Lincoln saw it. Whenever his second inaugural, he says that God has a different purpose, and the reason that the war is going on is because every drop of blood drawn with the lash is going to be repaid by one drawn with the sword. And that was Abraham Lincoln realizing that the reason we are not winning in the North, which was inexplicable, the huge numbers we had in our armies, and we just were not able to do it in a short amount of time. And then Abraham Lincoln came to the decision, and he had faith leaders around him all the time. And he willingly accepted them and their prayers over him and their efforts to help the country. They were the best people to help people in need. He knew the churches were so important. The religious people were so important for that. And that was the result that he came up with. God has a different purpose and reason. And when he wants the war over, that's when it will be over. And Donald Trump, after that first assassination attempt, it didn't change his personality. It didn't change who he was, except that, first of all, it made him more determined than ever, because that's what happens he's
a fighter.
When you try to get rid of Donald Trump, he's going to make sure that he's doubling down and fighting twice as hard. And we appreciate that in him. But he understood, he realized how close to death he was, and that it was God who was saving him for what? Hopefully,
a greater purpose. Yeah.
And hopefully to make America great again.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
But
Gretchen,
yes.
I want to ask you, because we just got a few more minutes left, but I do want to ask you just to go back to the garbage remarks and actually just to set some context here. Joe Biden earlier in the week interrupting Kamala Harris's speech and really stealing all kinds of headlines. Not a pro move on Joe Biden's part, but this is what he had to say about Trump supporters.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable.
Now, one of the things that I love about it, I know there are a lot of people who get bothered by Trump's harsh, words sometimes, or he's not polished enough for people. I've always loved it. It doesn't bother me at all. Katie and I have had this discussion. But when I think that President Trump is his best is when he is self-deprecating. And I think one of the most genius moments of the campaign is when he gets off Air Force One and he's wearing the safety vest and he gets in a garbage truck marked MAGA and he drives 2 feet down the street to go to a rally and he's got this orange vest on. We probably all saw it. But the part that stuck with me, and I will just paraphrase here, and Misty, if you have the video, you can add it in, but he gets up there and he said, everybody's watching. I was looking at this garbage truck and there was a big step there and I didn't know if I was going to make the step and I didn't want to fall in front of all of these people. And I think what really makes Donald Trump so likable and approachable to people who get him is that these are the thoughts we all have, right? I mean, how many of us have been up on a stage and we're like, please don't let me fall right now. Please don't let me hit my head on this podium or whatever it is. This is President Trump being honest and just being so relatable. And I think this is why he can be the billionaire, the Manhattan real estate guy, but he can still connect with the middle class. If Kamala Harris were wearing that safety vest, she would look like such a fraud. But for some reason, Trump can put it on and he looks like he's supposed to be there. Like it just fits. It's amazing.
And can I also just add the authenticity of his comment that he wanted to put his blazer back on before he got on stage. And they said to him, no, that vest makes you look thinner. So he's like, oh, right, I'm going to keep it on.
You never have to wonder what Donald Trump is thinking because he says it.
Yes.
And so many of us are just so refreshed by that. We do not have to wonder, is he just telling telling us things. Just no, he's not. This is actually what he thinks and believes, and he says it. Comments like, yeah, I won't even repeat comments that he makes that we wish he wouldn't, but he does. And it's a part of it, but it's the fighter that we need. And it's the leader that we have to have in order to bring America back together.
Really interesting stuff. The correlation that you've created between Abraham Lincoln and President Trump, and now the latest, The Magic and Mayhem of Trump. It's available wherever you get your books. Gretchen Wollert, thank you so much. You're such a delight to talk to. GretchenWollert.com. You can follow her on X as well. Gretchen Wollert, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks. My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism, available wherever you get your books. Also, katiegorka.org. You can also follow her on Facebook. Just search for Catherine Gorka on X, Gorka Katie. And you can find me on social media as well, Facebook and Instagram, Jennifer Horn Radio, and on X and on Twitter, X and Twitter, the same X and on Truth. See, I'm still in a little vacation mode. You can find me at Jennifer Horn. And don't forget to leave us those 5-star reviews and share Happy Women with your friends. It means a lot and we appreciate it. It really does help. You can connect with us on all of our platforms at SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Thanks so much for joining us. This is another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.